had problems sometimes with my PC. Just to introduce this session, I want to remind to all of us what is at the base of the patient association. And every time people ask me why many years ago we start with other parents of children affected by mitochondrial disease, we started with the experience of the association. The story always starts from pointing out the difference between the expectation and the real life. All patients and parents and families that face the mitochondrial disease have a deep impact in his life, in their life, and the impact is the difference between expectation, what we figure, what are the picture that we have done of our life for the future, and what is the real life, the need of support, the need of the needs of attention that we have to do to our children, to the people that we love and that is affected by mitochondrial disease. I'd like to show once again this video. It's a short video, very touching. It's in Spanish, but I think that images are it can be understood by everyone, that can show exactly what happens in the minds of parents that faced with rare disease, and in particular with mitochondrial disease. Let's see this short movie.
Cuando vas a tener un bebé es como planear unas vacaciones. Ese viaje a la playa con el que siempre has soñado, por fin lo vas a hacer. Entonces empiezas a comprar guías de las mejores casas del mundo y hacer planes maravillosos. Pasear por la orilla, varte a echar una larga siesta. Es todo tan emocionante. Finalmente llega el gran día. Preparas tus maletas y allá que vas. Varias horas después, la carretera se corta y comienza un sendero lleno de pinos que se adentra en un bosque.
Bienvenidos a la montaña.
A la montaña. Pero si yo iba al mar. Y aunque te lleva algún tiempo asumirlo, comienzas a pensar que no has llegado a un lugar tan horrible. Simplemente es diferente. Porque si te pasas la vida quejándote de que nunca llegaste a ir a la playa, puede que nunca tengas la libertad para poder disfrutar de todo lo especial que tiene la montaña.
So this is what happens knowing the diagnosis of mitochondrial disease for a person that we love. The diagnosis changed the perspective of life, and a rare disease diagnosis changed deeply the way in which we see our life. The important impact is in expectation about life, family management, personal freedom, priority in life, and obviously it impacts our working experience, job, our job, and the way in which we behave in social moments. So, what are the needs that people have when receive the diagnosis of mitochondrial disease or in general rare disease? The very first thing is information about the disease. What clinician calls natural history, we calls it our life. We would like to know what happens to our life in the next future and in the far future. And the lackage of information about natural history doesn't allow us to see clearly our future. So for this reason, all the families and patients feel the need to stay together with other people that share the same experience, and from they would like to take information that are not available in other ways. So these very important needs come together with the second needs that is to overcome the sense of guilt, because we want to know what happens to our life and want to answer to the question, what did I do to deserve this? The third important question that's allow people to start with a new experience in their life is the answer, what can I do to overcome this situation? The experience, the most important experience we have during the first phase of the diagnosis is the feeling of being alone. We fear to be alone, and the answer to this feeling is are the patient association, because mitochondrial disease doesn't affect all the instinctive society of human beings, and the second important thing is that the answer, whatever they are, can be found together to other people that share the same experience. This is why patient association starts, and this is why they continue to live and give support to the patients and families, because patients and families inside an association belongs to an enlarged family. The association becomes a place where nobody is judged, a place where people can share the pain and loneliness, knowing that the other people can deeply understand the experience and deeply understand the questions, and probably sometimes have some answer to that questions. The association is a place where nobody looks at your child impairment, but just look at you or your child without other things or other thoughts. The association is a place where you can find the right word to explain what happens, and immediately you can find someone who can suggest you the right way to overcome. At least the association, the patient associations, are the places where the experience of the disease becomes a social experience. And the social experience is an experience of connection and condivisions. And so the activities of the patient association are basically divided in four main pillars. The first of them is the providing information about the daily life. So the association are usually the contact center, the first contact center for families and patients. Is the place where they can exchange experience. Is the place where we can analyze the needs of guideline for managing medical, rehab, school, family problems, etc. The family association is also the same place in which patient and families have law and right assistance, and also fiscal and economic consultancy. But the patient association doesn't not complete the needs of patient and families, because there is the whole world outside the disease, and so the patient association have to become the reference in of national centers of diagnosis and therapies, because they have to interface with the clinicians and researchers for promoting standardization, assistance, and cure. This is very important in all the countries in which the assistance and cure are divided in different regions, or and by our perspectives, it's very important to have a standardization of the experience, the assistance of and the cure. Had to organize and participate into scientific and medical meetings. This meeting is the case, but all the main association in the world organize every year, so one or more medical meetings in which people, researchers, physicians, and patients and families are together and can share different points of view about how to manage the disease. And the other important thing to do for patient association is to increase the collaboration between different centers. The support to the research is the other main important space of activity of the association. In the last session, we discussed about how AMMI or the other patient association can help our researchers to find the outcome measures, how to solve some problems about the trial. So this is the evidence of the importance of the contribution of the patient association to the research. Probably we don't have money enough to support the development of the cure. It's something that we would like to do, but probably we don't have enough strength to do it. To do this, for this reason, we have to collaborate with a broader field of people and including in this community all the stakeholders, so pharmaceutical companies and academia and medical centers, and everybody have to collaborate to the common project. And sometimes patient association are the starting point and to behave like a leader in this important activities. And the last thing that is important between the activities that the patient association do is lobbying, so increasing public awareness about the mitochondrial disease. We discussed about that in the last part of the last session in this meeting, and surely this is one of the most important things that we have to do. Probably patient association are the only the only organization that can do it better and can allow to bring all the all the power of the other stakeholders and put it together to increase the awareness and obtain results. I would like to close this short presentation with another short video that resume this presentation. Is a short movie that we made some years ago, and the difference between the light part of some of the movie and the dark part can allow you to understand what happens in our life.
Con la nascita di un figlio inizia a fare grandi progetti. Per lui sogna una vita felice, piena di amore e benessere. All'improvviso però si fa buio tutto intorno. Ti ritrovi solo, con la paura che qualcosa da un momento all'altro porti via quello che hai di più caro. Questa storia può avere un lieto fine, perché qualcuno come te ha deciso di tendere una mano. Non lasciateci al buio. Il vostro aiuto è la nostra energia. Mitocon, insieme per lo studio e la cura delle malattie mitocondriali.
Okay, thank you. So this is my family. Probably we are not a normal family, but we are here, and we would like to support for all we can do the mitochondrial community. So thank you.
Thank you, Piero. So I am now just going to very briefly take everyone through IMP and the programs that IMP is currently working on and how we're serving the global mitochondrial disease community. Can you see my presentation on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So we are excited. This year marks the 10-year anniversary for IMP. IMP was started by Alia van der Veer, who just had a passion and is a patient, and also lost her brother to mitochondrial disease and had a passion for serving the global mitochondrial disease community. And this year, Alia stepped down. And so in June, a new board came on to take over the leadership. And so just quickly to introduce you to our leadership team, myself as the board chair, Allison McGuire, who is with the Lilly Foundation, is IMP secretary. Phil Yeske with UMDF is our treasurer. Paulo Morandi is a member of the board, and Joe DeBerry is our communications manager. So I would encourage you, if you have any thoughts, ideas, to always reach out to this team of eager leaders who are looking to expand how we're serving the global mitochondrial disease community. So IMP's mission is to increase the quality of life for people with mitochondrial disease by facilitating cross-border cooperation and collaboration among national patient organizations. And we know that individually, and as Piero say, we all have limited resources. We're all working overtime, trying to serve the patients in our individual communities. But when we can come together collectively and share ideas and share resources, everyone wins. And so that is the mission of IMP, is to pull the community together, no matter where we are in the world, and to encourage collaboration for the greater good of the community. We are affiliated, we're a member of the European Organization for Rare Diseases, which also has connections through the National Organization for Rare Disease in the United States, and also the Canadian Organization for Rare Diseases in Canada. And so we try to have affiliations globally. with some of the larger groups. So our objectives for IMP are to share our best practices and information regarding diagnosis. As we all know, that's one of the biggest pain points in dealing with mitochondrial disease, pathways to the development of appropriate care, and managing the disease. We also are committed to being an international bridge between patients, clinicians, scientists, industry, and policymakers. And as was talked a lot about in the previous session, there's lots of work to be done outside of just the mito specialists who we know are seeing the majority of the mitochondrial disease patients. And then also to promote and advocate for the speedy development of treatments and cures for mitochondrial disease. And so IMP is made up currently of 16 member organizations. As you'll see, we represent France, Spain, Belgium, the US, Germany, the UK, the Netherlands. We have representative organizations across the globe. And so that allows us to expand our reach, to share ideas. And also it gives us an opportunity to serve patients in areas where there may not be a patient organization, where we can extend our reach to those families as well. And membership is open. And so we would encourage other patient advocacy organizations, if you are serving the mitochondrial disease community, to reach out to us and join in IMP. So some of the main initiatives that IMP undertakes, we just all went through Global Mitochondrial Disease Awareness Week, which happens every year. And it's our opportunity to spread awareness of the disease throughout the world. And so some of the exciting points from this year, we had our second LHAN Awareness Day, where we had a presentation and talked about the use of technology for patients who are dealing with LHAN. And it was an incredible, incredible session that I had the opportunity to lead, to talk about all the unique initiatives and the incredible technology that's available to ensure that these patients have a continued sense of independence and are living a full life despite having a diagnosis of LHAN disease. And then we also have our Light Up for Mito. And so this year there were over 237 monuments lit up worldwide to spread awareness, all on the Saturday of Awareness Week. And so that was just really exciting to see the world light up green to spread awareness for mitochondrial disease. We also have our Cure Mills initiative, which we are a part of. And this is a consortium which will work to identify drugs that are suited for repositioning as interventions in mills, laying the foundation for a multinational clinical trial and a concrete path towards a cure for mills. And again, another opportunity where we can collaborate with researchers and clinicians across the globe to look for solutions to mitochondrial disease. And we also, about a year ago, just over a year ago, published an updated list of meds to be used with cautions for patients who have mitochondrial disease. And this was the first time, I know in the US, there was a list that existed. And so this was the first time that the global clinical community came together to make a unified recommendation on the list of meds that should be listed with caution and used with caution. And that's available on the IMP website. And we're also excited, we are a partner in the Genomic Global Mitochondrial Disease Registry program. And this will be the first non-clinical global mitochondrial disease patient registry ever developed. And we are really excited to be one of the initial partners in this initiative. And you'll continue to learn more about that. I know Phil Yeske will be talking more later about international patient registries. And so there'll be a lot more to come about ways that the patient and clinical community can engage and get involved in this global registry, which we're working so hard to launch. And then we also offer one-on-one support. As I said, we know that there are patients all over the globe who may or may not have a patient advocacy organization that is close to them. And so we encourage you to reach out to IMP, and through our partnerships with MitoAction and Mito Foundation, our teams are fielding those support calls and connecting the patients, no matter where you live in the world, to resources. And sometimes it's just, you need a listening ear. And so we're there to provide that support for you. And so we encourage other patient advocacy organizations to reach out, to share ideas, and for patients to connect with us to learn more about resources or whatever it is that you need to support you on your journey with mitochondrial disease. And then we also have an online presence. We have a private and public Facebook group, which is a great opportunity for the global community to come together, to chat, and to engage with one another online. So we encourage you to join those online communities as well. And also, of course, we have the IMP website, which has all kinds of resources related specifically to mitochondrial disease diagnosis, the different types of mitochondrial disease. We have all of our archives of our newsletter, which has incredible information about all the information that's going on worldwide in mitochondrial disease, updates from IMP, clinical trial updates, research updates, and then of course, information about our Awareness Week and also other ways that you can get involved with IMP. So I would encourage you, please reach out to us at info@mitopatients.org, and let's talk about how we can all come together and work together to support the global mitochondrial disease community. So thanks, Piero. I turn it back to you. Okay, well, I think up next, we are going to have a video from the Lilly Foundation.
Thank you, Mann. The video is going to start in a second. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lindsey Butterworth and I work in a science communication role with the UK's leading mitochondrial disease charity, the Lilly Foundation. I would like to thank the organisers for giving me the opportunity to talk with you today about the patient's voice and their needs when it comes to reproductive advice for mitochondrial disease and assisted motherhood. So as the leading mitochondrial disease charity in the UK, the Lilly Foundation now support over 900 patients and families from across the country who come to us for information and advice about a range of different issues when living with or caring for someone with mitochondrial disease. Since the charity was started in 2007 by Liz Curtis, who lost her daughter Lily to mitochondrial disease, and with Alison Maguire, who joined the charity after losing her daughter Neve in 2009, the team have shared their experiences to support other parents and families going through the same battles with a disease that may be difficult to manage and too often than not cuts lives tragically short. For parents who may be caring for a sick child or for those who have lost a child to mitochondrial disease, the desire to grow their family is still there, but is overshadowed with uncertainty, anxiety, and fear around having another child that may suffer in the same way or lose their fight to mitochondrial disease at a young age due to the current lack of curative therapies. However, since the Lilly Foundation was founded, the number of reproductive options that are now available to help reduce the risk of passing on mitochondrial disease have increased, and there are now a number of different choices available to parents who wish for a healthy child. These options include adoption, egg and sperm donation, natural conception with prenatal testing, IVF with pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD, and IVF with mitochondrial donation. Some of these options are suitable for mitochondrial diseases caused by genetic mistakes in the nuclear DNA, whilst others are suitable for mitochondrial diseases caused by mutations in the mitochondrial DNA, and some are suitable for both. But the decision is not always as straightforward as the genetics, and there are many different considerations when couples are deciding which reproductive option is best for them. To help with this, mitochondrial specialists from the Wellcome Centre for Mitochondrial Research at Newcastle University have developed an innovative clinical service that not only assesses fitness for pregnancy, which is vitally important given that the mother could have complications of her own associated with mitochondrial disease, but also provides expert advice on what options are most suitable, along with the necessary information for the couple to make an informed decision on which reproductive option they would like to use. For the rest of my talk, I'm going to focus on mitochondrial diseases caused by genetic mistakes in the mitochondrial DNA, as these are by far the most complex when it comes to transmission, and there are many different features unique to mitochondrial DNA diseases that can be difficult to understand and can make deciding on the most appropriate reproductive option challenging. So we all inherit our mitochondrial DNA from our mother, meaning that if a woman carries a genetic mistake in her mitochondrial DNA, this will most likely be passed to her children, but does not necessarily mean her children will be affected. There are a number of unique features that make this inheritance complicated. So the first is the idea of heteroplasmy, and the fact that most people who carry genetic mistakes in their mitochondrial DNA are heteroplasmic. And this means that only some copies of their mitochondrial DNA will contain the genetic mistake that causes the mitochondrial disease, whereas the other copies will be normal or healthy. There is also a threshold effect whereby the proportion of these faulty mitochondrial DNA copies containing the genetic mistake must exceed a critical level before the symptoms of the disease occur. This threshold can differ depending on the particular genetic mistake and can also differ between different tissues and between different individuals, which makes it difficult to predict how severely affected a person will be. Finally, and most importantly, when considering reproductive options, there is also a phenomenon called the bottleneck, and this occurs within women's eggs early in development and means that a woman who has a genetic mistake in her mitochondrial DNA can produce eggs with very different levels of the faulty mitochondrial DNA. So, for example, some of her eggs may have very low levels of the faulty mitochondrial DNA, and if that egg is fertilized, it would result in a baby with no or very mild symptoms of mitochondrial disease. Whereas she may also have eggs with very high or only faulty copies of the mitochondrial DNA. And if that egg is fertilized, it would result in a baby severely affected by mitochondrial disease. This mitochondrial bottleneck makes it very difficult to predict how much faulty mitochondrial DNA will be passed from a mother to her child. And although there is now a modeling tool available to help with this, it still makes genetic counseling for women with mitochondrial DNA disease very challenging, and there is not always an easy choice for a number of reasons. So you can see that before we even get to the stage of considering the most suitable reproductive options for a woman who carries faulty mitochondrial DNA, there are quite a few concepts that must be discussed if the decision is to be truly informed. And this is why the Mitochondrial Reproductive Advice Clinic in Newcastle is so important, as it provides this information in an understandable and accessible way with opportunities to ask questions either during the clinical appointment or afterwards when people have had a chance to process the information. This is crucial to any clinical pathway for those discussing reproductive advice, and also crucial that patient organisations like ourselves can signpost couples to this information. So if we think about the different reproductive options available for women who carry genetic mistakes in their mitochondrial DNA, it becomes apparent that there are pros and cons for each one, and it is not always going to be an easy decision when choosing which one to use. So adoption and egg donation are options that completely eradicate the risk of passing on mitochondrial DNA disease, but the child will not be genetically related to either one or both of the parents, and this is an important issue for many of our families. Conceiving naturally with prenatal testing is an option that means both parents are genetically related to the baby, and importantly for some of our families, means the couple can conceive naturally and don't need to go through what can sometimes be several cycles of IVF to become pregnant. The difficulty here is that once a pregnancy is established, the baby is tested in the early stages to see how much faulty mitochondrial DNA it has inherited from the mother. This testing comes with a small increase in the risk of miscarriage, and also depending on the result, the couple may then be faced with the agonizing decision on whether to terminate the pregnancy based on the risk of the baby developing mitochondrial disease. This may be less complicated if the result shows very high or very low levels of faulty mitochondrial DNA, but can be more challenging if an intermediate level of faulty mitochondrial DNA is detected. And this means the couple may have to make a difficult decision on whether to carry on with the pregnancy based on an uncertain risk that the baby will develop mitochondrial disease. The options to avoid this are pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD, and mitochondrial donation, both of which require IVF. So this is a difficult decision in itself, as even standard IVF can be intricate and uncertain, and an uncertain process to go through. And at the end of each cycle, there is no guarantee of a pregnancy. There are also a number of other factors that need to be considered, including the woman's age, her BMI, whether she smokes, how she responds to the hormone injections, and these may preclude her from an IVF option. And so it is important to share this information with women at a young age. PGD involves creating embryos in the lab that are tested for the level of faulty mitochondrial DNA. Those that are found to have no or very low levels of the faulty mitochondrial DNA may be considered for transfer to the womb. And this is where they will hope they will implant to establish a pregnancy. This is not always guaranteed, however, either because there are no suitable embryos or those that are suitable don't implant. And so it's important to manage expectation and for couples to be aware that they may need several cycles of PGD before they become pregnant. For some women who produce only embryos with very high or only faulty mitochondrial DNA, PGD will never be appropriate. And so mitochondrial donation is an alternative IVF treatment that reduces the risk of transmitting mitochondrial DNA disease. This innovative technique was only approved for use in the UK after a legislation change that involved the Lilly Foundation working alongside a number of other partners, including the Wellcome Centre for Mitochondrial Research team, to ensure the patient voice was heard in the debates that took place and the media coverage around the clinical application of this technique. This was crucial to the law change in 2015 to allow women to access the treatment in a highly regulated setting, which was a huge success, but is still not necessarily a straightforward option for those considering their reproductive choices. For example, like PGD, mitochondrial donation may require several cycles of IVF before pregnancy is established, but also requires a donor to provide an egg with healthy mitochondrial DNA. This technique also has a number of ethical issues that couples may have to consider depending on the particular type of mitochondrial donation that is offered. And it is also important to remember that the treatment is still considered experimental, and any children born are obliged to take part in long-term follow-up to help assess the safety and efficacy of the treatment. So I hope this demonstrates the complexities of assisted motherhood for women who carry faulty mitochondrial DNA and the need to provide accurate, accessible, and understandable information that will help them navigate the complexities behind the reproductive options that are available to them. At the end of the day, and with advice from mitochondrial experts, we need to help couples gather the information they require to make an informed decision and one that is right for them. And this is where patient organisations are crucial to help signpost couples to that information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, Catherine Mulvale cannot join this this meeting, and so we ask Philip Yeske from UMDF for the next talk.
Ciao, buongiorno a tutti. Hello, everybody. Great to be with you, even if it is very early here in the States on a Saturday. Thank you to Mitocon for the invitation, to Michelangelo, Piero. I'm still thinking about the videos that you shared a few minutes ago. They're so moving. Thank you for that. A special warm hello and best wishes to all the Italian mitochondrial disease patient families that might either be with us live today or watching this video in the future. Please know your friends in the United States are with you on this journey with mitochondrial disease. So the organizers have asked me to speak to patient populated registries, which is really quite a big topic, and I'm going to try to keep it rather light and interesting for again for early on a Saturday morning. But the key takeaway, if you listen to nothing else from this presentation, is that collaboration is the key, and it's the only way we're going to move forward as a community. So get my slides going here. So because this is really a patient voice platform that we're currently in, I just want to remind everyone there was a significant effort made back in 2019 here in the States to capture the patient voice. The UMDF, in partnership with MitoAction and the Muscular Dystrophy Association, hosted an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting with the FDA, where we brought together patients, patient families, caregivers, to understand the burden of the disease, to better understand what meaningful treatments look like for mitochondrial disease, idealized treatments. I mention this because all of these resources are captured and available freely. I've been updated the link on the slide here. Whether you're a patient family, a researcher, a clinician, industry, I encourage you to visit the site and take some time with these resources. The entire meeting has been captured in video form, a transcript, many important resources that are quite informative about the wishes of the mitochondrial disease community, the patients in particular. One of the key findings from that meeting was that patient registries play a really important role going forward in continued engagement of the patient community. And so that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my talk focused on here. So,
Dr. Yeske?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Sorry, this is the direction in Zambra. Are you sharing your screen? We didn't see that.
I am sharing my screen. It's sharing on mine, but let me start again.
Yes, please.
I won't restart. I will just show the. How about now?
Great, thank you. Full screen mode, and then we are done.
My apologies to everybody. I thought that I already was. Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah, good. Yes.
Full screen mode, not yet.
No, it is on mine in full screen mode.
Okay, let's try click ask and then do it again.
So I think I know the issue now. Hold on. And now I need to stop share and share a different screen. Apologies to everybody. No matter how many of these meetings you do, there is always something new, right, that emerges. Now we have it, yes?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Have a nice talk, everyone. Enjoy.
Let me quickly summarize what I was speaking to, because I want to make sure everybody has access to the link that I described, umdf.org, Voice of the Patient. This is where all of the materials associated with the patient-focused drug development meeting are archived, where I encourage you to go visit. So as I said, and now I need to get my pointer back. In looking at the global patient registry landscape, quite complex. I'll start by briefly talking about UMDF's activities in this area. Soon we will be launching MitoShare, UMDF's patient-driven registry. Some of our goals in our 25th year as we launch this is to create a robust research database. This will be focused on patient-derived data. It'll include support tools for the community. It'll be predicated on collaboration. And certainly look for multi-stakeholder involvement. But there are many registries, right? It could be regional focus, it could be language focused, it could be a specific form of mitochondrial disease focused to a registry. Some are more app focused, others are collecting general information that are more support oriented. And lastly, these large clinical registries that we've discussed and have been presented here are also now looking to collect patient-derived data. So this is a complex landscape, and by no means is this exhaustive. But I think the takeaway here, more than anything, is these registries are here and they're going to be in place. How do we make this all work together, this landscape. So with this exciting slide, I'd like to just get a focus on the fact that there are going to be many important sources of research data, and that includes patient registries, but it also includes clinical research networks, patient care networks, biobanks, genomic databases, wearables, apps, clinical trials, right? With many different types of data inside these sources. Could be demographic information, electronic health records, patient-reported outcomes, clinical assessments, genomic data, biosamples, and of course, clinical trial data is becoming increasingly important within our community, which is really exciting. So yeah, all of this has to work together. And my key messages here is, to the extent possible, the call to charge is harmonize and standardize where we can. And please, as you think about these initiatives, consent the patients for broad sharing so that we're not creating data silos where there's limitations on how the data might be used. I've also circled here and put an exclamation point next to GUID, or generic user identification, because with all of those different registries that I showed on the previous slide, it is inevitable that we're going to have patients that are presented in multiple places, multiple data sources with multiple types of data. And so if we don't have ways in a de-identified, privacy correct way to share data and know who is in what database, that's really going to lead to data silos as well and make for a not very effective landscape for data sharing. So please, let's continue the discussion on how to use GUIDs to ensure that. So with all of this on the previous slide, and the knowledge that we have all these different data sources and many different types of data, and of course, industry and regulatory agencies playing an important role, and I talked about clinical trial data, how do we begin to bring that together in some sort of organized way to make sharing of the data and maximizing the value of the data as easy as possible? And so our thought here is that there's a need for a new kind of initiative in the mitochondrial disease community, that UMDF is very pleased to be partnering with Dr. Amel Cura out of Mass General Hospital, many of you know on this meeting, called Treat Mito. And I'd like to just tell you briefly about Treat Mito. It is an initiative predicated on collaboration. The idea is to create a centralized ecosystem of collaborators, stakeholders, resources, and data associated with multiple mitochondrial disease initiatives within the community. It's the recognition that we'll never be able to get to a single place where all this complex data will be collected, but rather acknowledge that there are many different sources of data, many different types of data. Let's try to create a central repository where there's appropriate oversight, multi-stakeholder governance that allows those data to be used in the most effective way. This is all about maximizing the value of the data. Now, we're still in the very early stages of organizing this, but you can imagine to create something like this. And in the early stages, we will be focused first on the United States, but it's being built in a way very much that contemplates international collaboration. So what can we do once we have the multiple data types in a platform like this? So one of the first contracts that Treat Mito has executed is with the Critical Path Institute to take advantage of their Rare Disease Cures Accelerator data and analytics platform. I know it's really a mouthful, RDCA DAP. But the idea here is that we can maximize the value of the data by having access to robust analytical tools. So on the left-hand side, you see all these different data types are flowing in. What the CPATH initiative allows is to bring those data together, secure them, right, in an appropriate way, curate the data, and this is the really important part, map the ontology, standardize the data, clean up the data, and really get it to a point where we can consider these fully curated data that are now ready to be used for research purposes. So the goal here is to, again, acknowledge we're going to have many different data types, and they're not all going to be of the same quality. But we have to put some effort in to cleaning up that data, mapping that data to try to maximize the value of it. It's all about creating actionable rare disease drug development solutions using this platform. So we're really excited about the opportunities that this partnership with CPATH will afford out of Treat Mito. Now, to do that, right, we need a home for a big initiative like Treat Mito. So I'd like to just briefly introduce you to a tool that the UMDF is launching called Mido Nexus. The idea being that multi-stakeholder collaboration necessary to make Treat Mito successful is also true for many other initiatives within the mitochondrial disease community. Those could be patient care networks, those could be patient-centered research networks, really anything involving collaborators. The opportunity to create a platform where a stakeholder can come, log in, and see all of the projects they're involved with, and then interact with other collaborators, store documents there in a secure way. This is all about providing a tool that makes collaboration easier. So we're really excited to be building this on the Plexome platform. The first project that will be housed there will be Treat Mito, and we're already talking about other projects that we can bring onto the platform. Again, we're really excited about this opportunity to think about this not just as a US initiative, but as a truly global initiative. So I'll look forward to continuing the discussion with many of you about how we can partner on these important initiatives and tools. So let me summarize once again that the collaboration is the key. The registry landscape is complex. There will always be multiple registries, but to the extent we can, we have to work to minimize duplication of effort, harmonize, standardize wherever possible, be sure to broadly consent the patients to share their data so that we're not wasting data. And that's really the key point here is how do we maximize the value of the data? The worst situation is lost data, data collected and then never used again for another purpose. But just as bad is to have a silo of data that's only being used for a very narrow focus. So please think about ways to share the data and to collaborate to make that happen. We're going to need initiatives that help us bring together data sets, and we're going to need tools to make that happen as well. And that's where I briefly talked about Treat Mito and Mido Nexus. And as I said, I really look forward to continuing that discussion. So I think I'm going to stop there and look forward to continuing the discussion in the Q&A session as we finish.
Thank you, Phil. Now we ask to Sean Murray to talk about methods of supporting research. Sean?
Hello, Piero. Thanks for having me. You can hear me okay?
Okay.
I'll just start to share my screen. Alrighty.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. My name's Sean Murray. I'm the CEO of the Mito Foundation from Australia. The Mito Foundation is Australia's only mitochondrial disease dedicated organisation. We aim to support Australians who are living with mitochondrial disease and to progress research into mitochondrial disease to find some forms of treatments and ideally cures for mitochondrial disease. So thanks for having me here today. Before I get started, just in speaking today, I acknowledge everybody who's either listening in person or listening on the recording, whose lives have been impacted by mitochondrial disease. I pay my respects to you And on screen here is a photo of my brother Peter and my mother Lorraine, both of who tragically lost their lives too soon to mitochondrial disease. So in terms of my disclaimers, this is a list of my disclaimers here. But in saying that, I also acknowledge and pay my utmost respects to anybody involved in research into mitochondrial disease and the clinical care and treatment of patients who have mitochondrial disease. You have my unwavering and continued respect and admiration for the work that you do, and implore you to keep up the good work. So I've been asked today to talk about methods of supporting research, particularly from the perspective of a patient group. So as we know, the landscape or the spectrum of research into medical research, and particularly mitochondrial disease research, is vast. And it starts off in what's called basic research and moves through what's called translational research into clinical and translational research to try and make those findings in the laboratory relevant to people. And then the work of actually then implementing it and making it available through our various health systems. And this is a very simple diagram. Each of these areas is very vast and very complex. For me, as a non-scientist, I do laugh regularly when I hear the word basic research, because I've tried very hard and I'm not getting the understanding of these basic concepts. But so I know basic research is even very difficult there. But even if you look, for instance, at clinical research, that in itself can expand out into multiple areas here. For instance, in the drug development, what happens for drugs to be developed? It is very lengthy, it is very complex and very considered. And so there's a lot going on in this area, and it is perhaps overwhelming from the perspective of a patient group as to where we might start to make a contribution and to make a difference. But hopefully through my presentation, we'll touch on a few of the areas where I think the patients and the patient groups can make a good contribution. So we've just basically to summarize that research and the research landscape is complex, research is slow, and research is, of course, very expensive. And did I mention that research is very expensive? When we look at the traditional funding sources of research, we know that when we look at, so in the Australian environment, research is funded largely by the government through our tax systems. It's also funded through philanthropy, but largely the most amount of research here is funded is through government funding, particularly the basic end. We don't have a huge drug development industry here in Australia. A lot of that we look to overseas, but as a result, research funding here in Australia, and I know that this is similar around the world, is slow and it is scarce. It's difficult to attain for the researchers. It is highly competitive, and particularly the traditional research funders are largely risk averse in that they will want to see a strong case for the research. They want to see some preliminary data, some good data. They want to see a good track record of the investigators, etc. So it can really stymie these innovative initial ideas about research. And when we think about where the landscape of mitochondrial disease research is, and while it's progressed significantly in the 12 or so years since the Mito Foundation has been established, you might argue that the landscape of mitochondrial disease research is still in its infancy. And so it's a little bit hard to break through in a risk-averse type setting. So what role can the patient groups play? Well, patient groups by their nature can be and usually are rather nimble because we're typically very small. So it means we can move fairly quickly. And largely we are probably a little more tolerant of risk. So perhaps there's an opportunity here for some things that are starting to fall into place. However, most of us patient groups are very poor. We don't have a lot of resources. We don't have a lot of funding and a lot of money. So that can cause a challenge to try to crack into the research game. One area that's emerging in terms of research is, and I hope this isn't anything new, is an increasing emphasis on patient-centered research or patient-driven research. It is important, therefore, that patient and patient groups can advocate and facilitate this, that we have a seat at the table when it comes to defining the research outcomes. What are the things we're looking for when it comes for identifying the way that, say, clinical trials or research studies are done, so that it's not ridiculous from a perspective of the patient to be involved in, shifting that approach of patients being the subject of a study to really just patients being involved in the study. And funnily enough, patient-driven research has shown to lead to more meaningful outcomes, particularly outcomes more meaningful to patients. So for argument's sake, it might be all well and good that my FGF21 or my GDF15 levels are improving, but am I going to feel better? Am I going to have more energy? Am I going to have less fatigue? Am I going to have better days, more good days and less bad days? What are the things that are meaningful to us as patients? So that's an area where patient groups and patients can come into play in terms of supporting research. And while funds are always hard to come by, the patient voice is very powerful, and particularly powerful with government and with philanthropy and with the traditional funding sources. So another area that we can focus on, and we do focus on, but amongst our various groups around the world, is to advocate and sometimes agitate for increased funding in research by those traditional funding bodies. And as the patient groups, the landscape of patient groups matures, I think that this is an opportunity for us to have more influence in this area, and we've seen a lot of that happening out of the US and out of the UK. I know here in Australia it's an area that we work on. We're starting to see some improvements in the volume and the amount of funding that the traditional funding sources, largely the government, is investing into mitochondrial disease research. And I'd like to think that the work that we're doing has a hand to play in that increase in funding. For those patient groups that have some funding and can afford to fund research, it is critical that research is really on mission or in line with the purposes of the various patient groups. Different patient groups have different objectives. Some are set out to focus on a particular type of mitochondrial disease or a particular indication, say in the vision impairment. Others have a broader remit, focused on all mitochondrial diseases. So it is important that if a patient group is channeling funds into research, that it does match their mission. And it's also extremely important that the way they go about funding research is rigorous. And by rigorous, I mean it is there is some oversight, there is expert oversight, and oversight that is independent and objective. So that means sometimes it can be quite complex and sometimes a little bureaucratic to find the right researchers or the right experts who can give that oversight, but remain objective and remain non-conflicted, because this is a relatively small field. But it's important for us all to make sure we have our processes in place, that we are getting objectivity and that we are matching the research investments that we're making in line with our mission. And not only does the way we go about funding our research have to be independent, we have to maintain independence from a specific research group or a specific researcher, if that's what our mission is. But we have to be independent as we work more and we head into the translational side of research. We have to maintain our independence from industry groups. I think it's perfectly acceptable for organisations to receive and consider financial support from industry groups, as long as they retain independence on the work that they're doing, that it is objective and independent from the objectives of a particular interested group. When we look at the patient groups, largely they're country-based or regional-based, and sometimes there are more than one patient group from one country, but we're scattered all around the world. And arguably, if we're focusing, there is some of the research that we will want to fund, or the work that we will do that will be focused in our own jurisdictions, in our own geography. If we go back to the the spectrum of research that we touched on earlier, it might be fair to argue that really only the end point of bringing research discoveries into the health systems has a geographic constraint, and that all of the other research, particularly the basic research and the preclinical research, is arguably geographically agnostic. And so for that reason, I think it is important. It does provide an opportunity for us with such scarce resources to look at collaboration. And Phil from UMDF in his previous speech mentioned collaboration being key when it comes to patient registries. Well, when it comes to research funding, in my view, I think collaboration is a great opportunity, and it's the way that we can get more value for our money, where we can face the situation where we get multiples and benefits where 1 + 1 doesn't have to equal 2, but can equal more than 2. And this is an example of some fantastic collaborative research amongst the patient groups. This is the Lease Syndrome International Consortium. The consortium itself is an initiative being driven by financial contribution from a number of patient groups around the world, from the UMDF out of the US, as well as PALS, People Against Lease Syndrome, also out of the US, Mito Foundation from Australia, Mitocon out of Italy, and the Lilly Foundation out of the UK, that have collectively pledged $1 million to support this initiative. It's a multi-year research initiative aimed on improving diagnosis and developing therapeutics and developing optimized patient care for Lease syndrome patients. And this initiative is very, very close to formally establishing. A lot of the groundwork has been laid for an international multi-site, multi-center natural history collection project and initiative. And so really it's very close. We can almost hear it coming down the tracks there. So watch this space in relation to that. But this is a fabulous example of that collaborative approach to supporting research into mitochondrial disease. The last area I think I wanted to touch on really is perhaps a bit of an opportunity or a challenge for us patients and us patient groups, really, in terms of a way that we may support research. So for those of us who have the scale and the capacity to fund research directly, typically our model is pretty simple. We fundraise in whatever way we can. We raise the funds and we direct some of those funds into research, and we call for research applications and we write research grants. And that's the model, and that seems to be working very well to date. If we take an absolutely commercial or a purely financial view of this, the one thing that we can guarantee, and please only from the financial perspective, one thing that we can guarantee is that 100% of the funds that we invest into research will be spent. But there's an opportunity here, and it's not a new thing, but the concept of venture philanthropy. I think that as the field of mitochondrial disease medicine and mitochondrial disease research pushes into that translational end, and we've got a lot more industry interest and industry involvement in research that is still ludicrously expensive, this idea of venture philanthropy. So rather than just grant making, looking to invest basically, and invest wisely and invest opportunistically in entities that are looking to develop therapeutics for mitochondrial disease. And of course, the intent of venture philanthropy is that this, like venture capitalism, is that this could in itself produce a return, and the return of those monies could be reinvested again into further research, potentially via venture philanthropy, of course, and really start to accelerate this cycle. And how exciting would it be if we took a collaborative funding approach to something like a venture philanthropy for mitochondrial diseases? Of course, all it takes is money, as with everything. You saw it here first. So just to recap then and summarize, they're about patient groups, opportunities and methods for supporting research. For those of us involved in this, I think patients do and will continue to and must inspire research. We can be involved in research. We do command and demand a seat at that table. We can assist in research, of course. We can advocate and agitate for research to try to get more volumes of funds investing into research from the traditional funding organisations. We can fund research ourselves or drive research. And when we do that, it's important that we do so independently, rigorously, and ideally where we can and where it makes sense, let's do so collaboratively. And then ideally, let's do so innovatively as well. So with that, I thank you. I thank the organisers of the conference for the invitation to speak today. And I look forward to digging a little further into this concept in the Q&A session. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sean. Very interesting reflection and consideration about how to support research. We continue with our talks. In the program, we would like to hear something from Hema Ray about a patient voice, but she unfortunately is traveling and can join this morning. So I'd like to ask to Michelangelo Mancuso for the last talk of this section to give us the perspective of physician and scientist view of the needs from PACS.
Thank you, Piero. Actually, Ronnie Gorman from Newcastle will start the speech. She's also in the program with me.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Morning, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Super. Okay, so thank you for inviting me this morning to partner with Michelangelo. And what you said our challenge was what do we need from PAGs? And I would say, what do PAGs need from us? And I think when we look across the five, what I would say the most five important pillars in the mitochondrial ecosystem, and the 5 pillars of excellence is science, education, engagement, patient care, and also bringing the next generation of life scientists. And around those paradigms is what we need support with are what are priority setting, what are your priorities, because that technically underpins everything we've talked about over the last couple of days, because what's meaningful for the patient and the outcome. And I think Sean beautifully and in part stole some of my thunder, and in part eloquently said, you can have all these outcome measures, but if they're not relevant to your everyday living, we have to change. We have to change what we do, and we have to lobby change with policymakers and with the regulators for what they see as meaningful outcomes in trials. If we all truly come together and believe we want to find a cure. So reflecting on some of those paradigms, what could help us? I would say help unite us, help break down barriers to research, help us build better trust among the community, among ourselves. The current funding streams, which Sean has alluded to, whilst are competitive and are there to drive science, quite often are barriers because we're competing against each other. And therefore we can, the last session where we were speaking with industry and saying, how can you come together? I think all of us who have been in this field, myself perhaps only 12 years, but it's still 12 years, is we need to build trust and we need to break down barriers to push forward if we're ever going to get a cure. If I've learned anything over the last 18 months in the COVID pandemic is when there's a will, there's a way. That's right from the regulators to our local ethics, to the way we work across the world. You know, the exemplar of COVID vaccination, how it's been rolled out, is an exemplar how when there's a will, there's a way. All regulations that usually would take me 6 and 8 months for any trial, and sadly continued for the mitochondrial field, wasn't what I saw in the COVID world. Let's make that change as we push for policy change. It's not just to raise awareness about mitochondrial disease. Let's infiltrate every society every day, not as someone even said earlier about the 1 week of mitochondrial awareness. We underpin so many other diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, other diseases, including cancer, that of bigger numbers, have bigger awareness, but we need to let them know, find a cure for us, and you might also find a cure for yourselves, because that's how science works. That's how people care. And I think if I was asking PAGs, get behind us to get that campaign out there. We should have a campaign for all 365 days of the year. Something we're championing here in Newcastle. Help us do it. And also help us bring all the companies, gently nudge, not just agitate, force people to come together. I would suggest that today that you have a little look at the AMMI Prefer project, which we were very lucky to be partnered with an international collaboration that's been working over the last 3 to 5 years about where the patient's voice should be heard along the pathway of drug discovery. And I don't think it'll be a surprise for any patients on this call. It's right at the start. The difficulty quite often is by the time we're approached for a trial, the trial's already been designed, and it is very, very hard to effect change that's meaningful for the patient. And I fully understand that because it's financial. But when you think of a compound, the minute that you look at it, we do absolutely need to agitate for change. The voice must be right at the outset if we're truly going to effect change. I always keep saying this, you might find a good compound, but you don't measure it right, so we'll actually discard it. Or you get a compound and you absolutely don't, we don't measure the right thing. It looks like it's meaningful. And then when it goes to the patient, it doesn't affect what they're hoping it will. We're quite often stuck in part by regulatory frameworks around old-fashioned outcomes that don't measure what we need it to measure. Again, come together internationally, help us come together. It is exceptionally hard to find funding for outcome measures, anything that's non-CTEMP, so not a drug. Help us come together to find that funding, to support us, to agitate pharma, to agitate venture capitalists to give us that funding, because the truth is we're more powerful united. And as I'd put in a commentary, but my microphone wasn't working earlier, all of us data dump, push each other when we review articles, data dump everything. That means every data point, not just the cleaned up data that you have. And let's, as quite a few of us are editors on journals, accept the negative studies, publish the negative studies, see the value in negative studies just as much as the positive. So my last statement here is before I pass over to Michelangelo is, most people don't realize mitochondrial disease is more common than you might think. Let's get the message out there and let's find a cure. Michelangelo.
Thank you, Ronnie. I absolutely endorse what you said, and I will continue from the last 2 points that you have raised. Again, we were already discussing the necessity of a roadmap for mitochondrial disease trial readiness in the previous session this morning, and we all agreed also with the pharma that we really need to engage not only the physicians and scientists at the very beginning of the drug development program, but also the PAGs, because we must have in mind the pros. We must remember that it's not always a primary endpoint for us, it's a primary endpoint for the patient. So we need to deal with the PAGs, and the pharma must deal with the experts from the very beginning. this is also true now that we have been involved in trials, and we are realizing what I was already saying before, that we have too many different approaches and that we waste money, time, working in parallel in the same direction. So it's really time to have a roadmap for mitochondrial disease where we need to have money and the structure in the long period to work on these common aspects. And then another great point is, as Granny was saying, that awareness is important, as we say, but we should always remember to the other disease experts and PACs that by treating mitochondrial dysfunction, primary mitochondrial disease, most likely you will better understand the pathways beyond the other common disease, because rare diseases are always a model for the common disease pathogenesis. So this is another important message, not only because we now know that you are not so rare as a patient, but also because by treating mitochondrial patients, we will learn a lot also in more common diseases. And another point, and I guess I will stop here for a matter of time, that why we need to work together, to stay together. What we should expect from you is always the strong feedback. You don't have to be scared to yell at the doctor, to yell at the scientist. You don't have to stay behind the table when we have round tables. We need to hear your voices, because you are the ones that feel the disease. You are the ones that have a better view of real life problems in mitochondrial business. So we really deserve criticism. We are not perfect. We are not genius. We may make mistakes. So it is very important, transparency, and don't be scared about doctors and scientists, because a meeting like today and the other meetings that we had already in the past are exactly designed to have an open debate. We don't, we want to learn, we want to change, we don't want to keep doing the same mistakes, and we need your voice. Piero, I'm not sure the time, how much time we have left, so I guess maybe we could close here the doctor part, and we will stay with you for Q&A.
We have a bit of time, I think 10, 15 minutes, so we can open the discussion with other, with all the others. I asked Cura to help me to see about questions that are posted by our guests.
So it doesn't look like right now we've had any questions come in at this point. But I'll throw out a question to Sean. Sean, the concept that you talked about of the venture philanthropy is really, really interesting from a patient advocacy perspective. Can you just share a little bit more details exactly what that looks like as opposed to traditional research, right? We're talking about investing in companies, like you said, that are interested in funding pharmaceutical research. So how do we start that process? How do we start that conversation?
Well, perhaps I don't have the answer for that. Perhaps this may be the start of the conversation. I draw on one example that happened in another patient disease group here in Australia. And it came out, as often things do, from a serendipitous discovery. So this local patient group, it was focusing on a lysosomal storage disorder. Based on constraints of the way their company constitution, the governance of their company was set up, they could not fund research outside Australia based on their tax setup. So this forced them in a situation where they had an opportunity, where there was a gene therapy being developed for this lysosomal storage disorder out of the US. And so rather than fund research overseas, like write a grant, they bought equity in the company. So same outcome, the company received the money, but in fact, it was more favorable to the patient group because they got an asset. So the work still got done, but they then received some sort of potential return for this. Now, in Australian dollars, it was a several $100,000 investment that within a few years, it was the one that struck gold, right? It ended up, they cashed in on that. The research got done, the gene therapy is being investigated, and their return was in the order of, I think, 1 to 2 million Australian dollars. So for a patient group who's trying to fundraise a few $100,000 or whatever it might be in your local currency, we know how hard we have to work to do that. This could purely financially, that's the best possible outcome that we've just described here. But we know that these researchers, these drug developers are, they're in business and they're raising funds through venture capital. Then that's the opportunity that presents here. It's not new, but it's just the kind of thing that might be a way for us to be thinking. And, as much as we can pull our resources in terms of patient numbers and expertise, etc., maybe there's a way for us to pull resources financially beyond direct grant making and looking at this as an opportunity.
Yeah. Do you think, I know we talk a lot about, remaining independent of the pharmaceutical companies, right? We take the dollars, but we need to remain independent of what they're doing. Do you think that opens up the door for any kind of conflicts that way if you're invested in the company?
I think absolutely. And I think that's where it has to be. It has to be rigorous and it has to be independent and some sort of oversight by expertise in terms of the science or the medicine of what's being proposed by this organization. I think that is even more important than what it would be otherwise. Absolutely.
Yeah, Sean, maybe I can just add to what you're saying, Sean. You're right. It absolutely still begins with rigorous peer review of the science, right? And that's judged valuable. The form, whether it's a grant or equity, whatever the mechanism used, that's a different discussion altogether. But it begins with the science and the acknowledgement that when you move in this direction, it's never going to be a one-to-one. Every time you engage in this, there's going to be a huge success. So probably the most famous example here in the United States is the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, that very early on put some money into a contract research organization that did some high throughput screening for cystic fibrosis drugs that led to a hit that turned into a lead, that then turned into a drug that went to the clinic, that eventually was commercialized for cystic fibrosis. And the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation was very smart to write their agreements that they would have a chance to participate in the success of any drug that came out of that arrangement. That led to over $1 billion coming back to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. I don't think, every example can be exactly like that. But what's interesting to me is you might think, oh, well, that's cystic fibrosis. It's simpler than mitochondrial disease. But that first drug only treated less than 4% of all the patients with cystic fibrosis, right? But by doing well, in addition to doing good, that money could be reinvested to now work on drugs and combination therapies that can help the next 10% of patients, and then the next 10%. And I think with mitochondrial disease, we're going to need a similar kind of model. We're not going to solve everything, right, with a single drug, but success, reinvest, take on the next piece, reinvest, and continue. So, and then that's the exciting part.
And then to Grania and Michelangelo's point of the daisy chain impact of the improvements in primary mitochondrial disease therapeutics are going to have commercial benefits way beyond this, potentially in the diabetes, in the Parkinson's, in the Alzheimer's. So
it's a differentiator for our community, for sure.
Mind if I comment to that? Because I'm listening and building up here in Newcastle and sharing, because remember, not all centres have the same availability. And as charities, quite often around the world, we reach out to you and you may sponsor a nurse or a physio or an outcome measure or trial. Start thinking about business development managers, help the centres to see the IP and the patentable stuff. When you get the grant across your table, instead of just with respect to looking at the science, that's where I always look at CF as the model. We have to look to the venture capitalists going down, but if you haven't protected your stuff, and I see John's come on camera because pharma are really good at this. We're not so smart at this. We're scientists. Having a really good business development manager on site has certainly, from my experience, revolutionized what we're doing. And I think as a group internationally of charities coming together, because I know we share our business manager with Lily if they need some input or if something comes across, or if I'm on any of your panels, Sean, and I get something I'm looking at it, I would have a word with our business so that I make sure that you're getting value for money when I'm reviewing grants. But it would be quite nice just to say that you might want to look at that, because that is the future. Every penny, every bit of science that we do, because we're so small, we have to keep target that we will find a cure for cancer and diabetes. And that's where they get all their big money. And whilst we are focused on primary, we will not shift policy, because I'm afraid that's humans for you on a small thing. But if they see the value for them as an individual, oh, if one day I had cancer, if one day I had a stroke, if one day I had Parkinson's, and therefore right from the onset for everything we have. And whilst we quite often don't see IP in what we do, there is significant IP and patentable data in what we do. And that's perhaps where you as a societies come together, would maybe think of different ways of funding centres.
Just to, if I might, bring sort of the industry voice here. I think, Sean, you said, you highlighted the expense of drug development, and most certainly it is extremely expensive. And, industry sometimes, because we need to survive in order to bring drugs to the market, sometimes industry gets put into a box that, they're looked upon with suspicion, and partnerships with patient advocacy groups, which by definition are focused on the patient. There can be sort of an elephant in the room that makes people uneasy with that partnership with a commercial entity. But I really look at it as a three-legged stool. That drugs are going to be brought for patients by companies, with science that's developed at the academic level. So really the collaboration is important. And I think sometimes the perspective of industry's motivations can get in the way and can sort of put a cloak over some of the opportunities for these kind of partnerships that we're talking about, and impede progress. So, industry is your friend. But we if we're successful in what we do, bringing a drug for patients in this mitochondrial disease space, the rewards will come. But our focus is pure as well. We want to help bring solutions.
I think the key there, John, partnership, and I don't think we cannot shy away from these partnerships. We just need to have a good framework for them, and ones that can be done in the best outcomes for the patients, as you said, and in a transparent way. I think we've got to embrace, not shy away from them. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And I would also say that, it's the patient advocacy group's responsibility to help, I think, the patient community understand the nature of those relationships and why they're important, and to develop a level of trust in those relationships. So I think we can help facilitate that and ease those challenges a lot.
Just two questions from the chat. Hilda Care Case asks about what about adults, because it seems that discussion, our discussion deals with just with children and not adults. And she asked also how can be a patient assertive about their needs and worries with their doctors, so that the doctors doesn't not turn away from, say, patient being not cooperative. About the first things, I would like to answer that our worries are for children and adults in the same way. We know that mitochondrial disease can start both in adults or in the children age. So our attention is the same versus every patient, and I think that the same is for doctors. The second question is important because the relationship between patient and doctors are crucial, especially in some part of the life of patients and families. So I would like doctors here present to answer to this question.
Would you like me to, and then maybe you, Michelangelo, address? So I take the first part. I'm an adult clinician, and we're very interested in right from birth to right to the end of the life spectrum. So to reassure you, Hilda, and I'm looking at the representatives from across the patient advocacy groups, and I've worked, I think, with nearly every group, and they're champion right from birth, right through the age spectrum. So just to reassure you, perhaps joining a little bit late, it did look like it was just about babies. To reassure you, it's about all spectrum, and it's really important that that message gets out there as where it's, and even sometimes, and I will take responsibility representing Newcastle, that sometimes the message looks we're focused on the next generation of children. We're very clear, our mission is very much about people living with mitochondrial disease. As a clinician myself, to address your second question, it can be quite difficult. You're absolutely right about there's not enough mito specialists. And I think that was part of when I was discussing the 5 pillars, and one of them being around education. Perhaps a little plug for the Mito 2I in Newcastle endeavour at the end of November. We're piloting something quite innovative in that we're going online to teach and train the next generation of clinicians and scientists how to examine patients, how to identify it. So the truth is real-time examination. So we have to share good practice. We have to push guidelines, but it is very hard when you're in front of a clinician, as you say, to feel you're not being cooperative. I think part of the responsibility comes back to us to better educate, to bring the next generation through, to make sure clinicians are aware. I think it comes back to all of our statements about raising awareness about mitochondrial disease. I think the top thing I always think about our community, and sometimes it's a very hard listen that you think, oh, I'm champion. The first thing they'll report back when you audit your own services, you know, we're not doing enough to educate doctors. We're not doing enough to educate people about mitochondrial disease and raise awareness. So, you know, pushing past, you know, our engagement officer, Julie, is always saying to me, Gráinne, we have to stop preaching to the, you know, the converted. And she's absolutely right. We have to get beyond the mitochondrial community with respects, because we all know we have to really push out beyond that. And again, that's something else that we work across the different charities to try and support. But I think we need to really, over the next year or two, specifically target that aspect as beyond the mitochondrial community. Michelangelo?
And following the education points, we are already trying to improve the knowledge through the different societies. As Gráinne knows, I mean, we have, for instance, already organized at the European level multiple workshop or teaching course during the European Academy of Neurology. The same also Serenella did at the European international level with the World Muscle Society, and the same the American community is already trying to develop. For instance, Cura is the president of the Mitochondrial Medicine Society, and together with the UMDF, they are developing this MitoU, if I remember correctly, Phil, as some kind of web platform where mitochondrial experts post, lectures and different material for general doctors, not expert on mitochondrial disease. So we need to have more Mito specialists is one of the issues, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's all about having a suite of materials that can help train the next generation of clinicians, but also for the patients to be able to come and learn about the disease as well, or something as important as clinical research and how to participate in it. There's a lot of opportunities, right, through a concept like MitoU to just build out a suite of educational materials that can help all the different stakeholders in our community.
Yeah, and Dr. Fran Kendall is just rolling out a new initiative with her practice where they're bringing in the patient story and the patient voice to help educate the clinicians, which is a really great perspective, right? Talking about, I went to the emergency room and this was my experience, and then helping the clinician to understand, well, this is what should have happened. This is what did happen. This is what should have happened. And it's a very unique perspective to learning because they're learning directly from the patients and their real world experiences and the challenges that they're having. So that's also a really unique learning experience for the clinical community to participate in.
What I would say, Cura, is that we've done that. And I'm sitting here going, crick, I wish I'd known that because we could have reached out. We need to share what we're all doing. We're all working, thinking, oh, I've got this great idea. And I think I could champion that. And I think we all here today, the bottom line is patient voice, front and center. We all need to work harder to get it there and not to recreate the wheel. Perhaps what we need to do is actually set up a platform where we just, and it doesn't have to be any fancy name of anything, and nobody feels they own it, because then that'll be a barrier. You just dump and say, this is what I'm doing this week. Has anyone else done this? And we improve communication. And I actually think PAGs are more likely to help everybody, to bring us all together to share that. Yeah. And literally you'd have a platform. And the same thing is, if I'm in the lab and I've got one of our little scientists said, oh, would you like to set up an international thing if with experiments not working, you just push out to the international, not any of the fancy ones, doesn't have to be any of the G, just got that anyone know. And I suspect if we went through a platform of united PAGs, we're more likely to get a united front and a more better communication, because literally it'd just be, I'd go, don't have time to tell it all, but I'm sending you the link, and literally a chain. So what we're creating is a chain of information internationally that you'll drop in. And again, I keep coming back, look what we've been able to do over 18 months through Teams chat, where you literally send a link dump and it pops up on your phone and you quickly look at it and you either discard it if it's relevant or not. So again, perhaps in some of these initiatives we're doing, we again come together. Mm-hmm. And if I was to say something, I have to give credit to Francesca for organizing this meeting. Francesca set up with me to midnight on Thursday night. So it was my midnight, must have been her 1 o'clock, because we wanted to use patient videos. But when we think about it, we couldn't use them. Mm. Yet all the patients had given permission that we could use them. Because of the platform, I couldn't show them. So when I did my talk yesterday, I revised my talk because I couldn't show them. So again, if there was a simple thing that you could come and help us with, how internationally, if we want to teach each other to examine patients, and with due respects, reading about it, seminars about it, doesn't come anywhere close to actually seeing it. How can we share things like that with good practice? And there again, just a small challenge from this is, how can we best share good practice? Remote, we talk about remotely monitoring patients, but how can we dip in to remotely teach each other? Because from the pandemic, I'm doing remote clinics where I used to go and I dip in where the clinician is and I ask them to do things for me that they may not normally do. And then I look and I go, oh yeah, that's great. That's what that is. We need to do the same if we're going to teach and educate, because we are quite small community. We could come together as an international community and share resources. But when I went to share on Thursday and the Friday, I couldn't share with you.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's an initiative IMP's board can talk about, pooling together for the community.
Yeah, and give credit to Hilda for raising it.
Yes.
I think that we have half minutes for the last question, and I would like Cura to answer. The word that I heard the most in this meeting today is collaboration. From PAC's perspective, how could collaboration look like when several PACs are working on similar projects and striving for fundraise from the same pool of patients and stakeholders? I think that this is the case.
Yeah, and I think it's we all are, we have a lot of overlap, but we also don't have a lot of overlap. There's some patients that we are seeing that other PAGs aren't, and the hope is that by us all taking these initiatives, we'll catch the entire community. And as Phil said, having some kind of tool that will allow us to pull all of this information so that it's all pulled together. So it doesn't matter what system you decide to go with, it all comes together for the greater good. And I think, it's about the collaboration between the organizations. And I think that has to be much better than it has been. And I think it's, something MitoAction is definitely committed to. And we continue to have those conversations, how we can improve on that.
Yeah.
Because we don't want duplication. We don't want to ask, patients are already being pulled in 1,000 different directions. And we don't want to make this process of sharing their information more cumbersome. We want to make it as simple as possible for them, so that they, and that they're informed how that information is being used, where it's going, how it's being handled. So we want to make it as simple as possible for the patient community. That's the goal.
And if I could jump in there, Piero, as well, I would say that all of us, patient advocates, patients, researchers, clinicians, have a duty to call it out if we see it happening and to hold ourselves to account, because we can't afford it. None of us can afford it. It's a waste of time and resources. And I think we've got to hold each other to account. We've got to set the bar high and go for it.
Amen.
Right. Okay. I would like to thank everybody. I think that this session, also in this session, many ideas come, and other action we will take is inspired by the discussion of these days. I want to thank all the speakers. Thank you for taking part of this on this conference. And I would like to thank also all participants. We had a huge success in this meeting. We had 400, I think 400 of people that subscribed for the meeting, and they attend with a mean of 200 people in both days. So we are very glad, and we hope that the discussion and the presentation in this meeting will really help to go forward and find the cures. So thank you again to all participants, all speakers, and at last I want to thank again all our scientific committee. Enrico Bertini, Valerio Garelli, Massimo Filosto, Costanza Lamperti, Michelangelo Mancuso, Olimpia Musumeci, Serenella Servidei, and Valeria Tiranti for helping us in organizing this fantastic meeting. And the next appointment for us is next year, but surely we will have occasion to meet and continue the discussion in the next weeks and months. Thank you to everybody.